Ryan, how's life for you now? How's it going?
Life's fantastic. Yeah, I'm down here in Melbourne, Australia. For us, we're sort of at the end of our summer period now. We've had a beautiful summer down here. I've got my son who's 6 years old. Back into school. He's in year one this year. Yeah, I'm very grateful for my life. It's had a fair few twists and turns, which I'm sure we'll probably touch on and talk about in this chat. But look, I do my best to be grateful with where my life's at the minute.
The Center for Healing. This is how I found you. And I know that the Center for Healing started back in 2016, and it was an outpatient clinic and was very much in person, not online. What's the story behind it?
Yeah, the story behind it was I went through a lot of issues with my mental health, a lot of anxiety, depression, a whole bunch of other things that really manifested in me becoming addicted to drugs. So I had a big drug problem. So I went through my own journey of mental illness and addiction. And I was very fortunate enough to come out the other side of it. And I always use the analogy, it's like whenever we've been through something really, really challenging in our life, it's kind of we're coming out the other side of the fire with buckets of water that we can then help other people. And so that sort of lit a fire in me to want to help people who are in my situation. And so we started the Centre for Healing at the start of 2016. So we just had our 9-year anniversary only a few weeks ago, which is really exciting. And we were an outpatient clinic down here in Melbourne, Australia, seeing clients who were struggling with their mental health, addictions, stress, nervous system dysregulation, all of the above. And I use air quotes, it's like we would do alternative therapy. It doesn't seem alternative to me because it makes complete and utter sense. But a lot of our philosophy is there's always underlying drivers behind our human behavior. And so those underlying drivers, what we have found, have been in, you can call them emotional imprints, traumatic imprints, undigested life experiences, whatever label you want to give it. It's these challenging circumstances that we've had as human beings that we haven't been able to properly resolve. And because of that, we create adaptations within us and thus behaviors on top. And so we really are focused on root cause. So we would have clients come in and they may have been in the system already where a lot of people are just trying to manage their symptoms, where we're like, what's the cause of these symptoms? We don't want to just spend our life managing these surface level symptoms. We want to know what's really going on under the hood, what's happening underneath. So we ran an outpatient clinic. We had very, very great results. We were very successful there. We grew from just myself and Melissa, who's my partner now, to, we trained a team up in the methods that we would teach. We're a holistic program, so we would deal with people's nutrition. We had a nutritionist, a kinesiologist. We would have people doing infrared saunas, float tank therapy, as well as a lot of the trauma work that we would do in our therapy sessions. Timing was just impeccable. We had a child at the end of 2018. And so during 2019, we were planning on how we can have a better lifestyle and be there for him growing up. Because, we were running this business that we started from scratch that didn't exist before. And we're trying to learn as we go. We were having all of the issues that you have with business, but all of the successes as well. And we were working a hell of a lot. And I always tell people I'd be the biggest hypocrite in the world because the amount of men that I had sat with in session who were just grieving their childhood because their dad was never there. He was working all the time. And I'm like, if I did the same thing, I mean, it's just crazy. So we decided that at the end of 2019, we would move our business online and go traveling with our son while he was very young and have him experience different cultures. So we had about maybe a 4-month head start on COVID. And so, yeah. I mean, if we hadn't have gone online, we would have had to anyway, a few months later. So we're very, very lucky. We ended up moving our business online. We had so many people over the years at our center saying, you should be training people in what you do here because it is so different. And so that's what we decided we wanted to do. And so we went on traveling. We started in Southeast Asia. We went to Koh Samui, an island of Thailand, which is one of my favorite places on the earth. We were going to spend a few months there before deciding what to do next. We were there for nearly a year and a half because we were there during the COVID lockdowns. And I say stuck there, but I use air quotes because it was a much better place to be than Melbourne, Australia. I would speak to my friends like Melbourne, Australia holds the record for the most lockdown city on the earth during the COVID time. And I would speak to my friends back home, and we're on video call, and I'm like, should we try and get home? Like, what's the deal? And they're like, they see me at some, Paradise Beach or something, and they're like, please don't come home. Like, it's just stay there. So and that was an interesting experience being there as well, because that island is based on tourism, and all the tourists, most of them had to go home. But we really spent that time building our business, our online brand, and so building our practitioner trainings, building our courses, and yeah, since that time we've been doing a lot. We call ourselves, I guess, now an online education platform. People can come. Our main kind of jam is we have modalities to help people treat trauma and these emotional imprints. We have a lot of people coming into our courses with a more traditional background, be that psychologists, counselors, social workers, coaches. We get all different types of people. But then we also do a lot of educational courses just for the general public, because people are really, they're interested in these things now because they want to know what's actually going on, whether it's for themselves or a loved one. I think people are really, really interested in understanding themselves and other people at a much deeper level. So, yeah, we've been fortunate enough. We have well over 100,000 students all around the world, and it's amazing to be able to connect, like connecting you today on the other side of the planet at night time for you, morning for me. It's awesome.
Trauma. What are the biggest misconceptions you hear about trauma?
Yeah. So some of the biggest misconceptions around trauma are trauma is very subjective. So, what is traumatic for one person may or may not be traumatic for another. Trauma is not an experience or event that happens, it's what happens inside of the human being as a result to external stimulus. So in that instance, we classically have thought as a collective, thought of trauma as sexual abuse, physical abuse, veterans being away at war and witnessing or doing horrific things, maybe car accident, and all of that stuff is trauma. But it's such a broader topic than that. One thing that we're really, really passionate about educating on at the Center for Healing is developmental trauma. And developmental trauma can be a lot more subtle than those more what we would call acute or overt types of trauma. And that can be just a basic neglect or slight, feelings of rejection over a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period. And those things can manifest exactly the same as someone who's been physically or sexually abused as a child. So oftentimes we downplay our human experience. And so a lot of people would come into our offices and go, oh, I'm struggling with anxiety all the time. I'm so hypervigilant and so anxious, but I have no reason to be. Nothing happened to me in my past or my childhood that has caused that. I know my friends, Jenny and Carl, and they've been through horrible stuff, so they have an excuse to be that way, but not me. I haven't been through that. And what we find when we really dig deep with those people, there's oftentimes some form of developmental trauma in there, and, I've also had siblings, we would have someone come in for an initial consultation where I'd spend half an hour, 45 minutes with someone explaining what we do and a lot about trauma. And sometimes their sibling would come in with them as like some emotional support. And I would see them both talk about their childhood, and they've had such different experiences of their parents and their environment growing up. And it just shows that we're all having a very subjective experience as human beings. And so one of the worst things we can do is compare to other people. Normally, if we have some mental health issues, then there's some sort of trauma going on. We just need to be with the right experienced person to be able to highlight what that might be.
And is healing even possible? Like, is it a work in progress for life? Or when does somebody know that they've healed?
Yeah. Well, it definitely is possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job. And it's very individual to that type of person, what they've been through. You can some traumatic imprints can heal up really quickly. And we know that they're healed up because what would trigger the person in their day-to-day life today no longer triggers them. So let's use an example, and this is a great example that we use because people would look back at this and go, well, that's not trauma. What are you talking about? But we use the example here of, let's say I'm in grade 2. So I'm young, I'm at school, I'm a bit of a shy kid, and we're in class, and for whatever reason, the teacher's asking a question, I feel like I really know the answer. And normally I wouldn't, share because I'm a shy kid, but I feel like I know the answer. So I put my hand up, they say, yep, Ryan, what do you think? And whatever I say, it either sounds funny or it's wrong, and everybody starts laughing at me. Right. And so in that moment, I feel very alone and ostracized by the group. And all I do is look around and see people laughing at me. In a moment like that, and any moment where we perceive some sort of threat, whether it's physical threat, social threat, psychological threat, we'll look around for what we call a resource. It's someone that we can latch onto and connect with, who can hold us and help us regulate our nervous system. In that moment, I might look around at my close friends as a resource, and they're laughing harder than anyone. So I'm like, okay, that's not a resource. Let me continue to scan the room. And I may look at the teacher. I'm like, oh, the adult, that's going to be a resource. I don't think this consciously. The human organism does this automatically. And I realize that they're either ignoring me or they're laughing too. They're not a resource. So what I've done, I've opened up what we call a loop, inside of us, of embarrassment, of shame, of fear. And I don't know how to close that loop, because we heal relationally, right? And that's why a relationship with a practitioner or therapist is so important. We heal relationally. And so what happens then, I go through my day, and it's not to say that we'll never go through these challenging circumstances. That's what we do as human beings. But let's say it's an ideal world, and that night I go home to my parents and they're a very safe container. They understand trauma. They're very open about talking about our feelings and everything. And I can go home and express to them what happened in class that day. They might be able to physically hold me while I cry about it or shake in fear about it, and I can help close that loop. But let's be honest, 99% of homes aren't like that. And so maybe there's no resource at home where I can talk about that. So what happens, this loop remains open, and I never fully process that experience. When we have a highly traumatic experience, even if it is just that moment in class, and when I spoke about trauma being subjective, that might be held as a traumatic imprint for 1 or 2 out of 10 people. And for the rest, it won't, right? We don't know until we understand the individual. But in those moments, I start to make sweeping decisions about myself and the world, which are what we call beliefs. And so in that moment, I may create a worldview that says it's not safe for me to speak up. And so what I do then, I create this identity that it's not safe to speak up. And in any moments where I feel the need to speak up and maybe I start speaking up, that grade 2 version of me will become very active in my system, and I'll experience fear and shame and embarrassment because it was all locked in that moment. And so you could fast forward decades. And this is why, the saying time heals all wounds is complete rubbish, because when it comes to traumatic imprints, it just doesn't. Because I can be in a relationship 20 years later and I feel like my needs aren't being met in the relationship. And I'm like, I need to speak up and express my needs here because this isn't fair. And I go in to speak to my partner. And as soon as I open that door, I get that, I get all the fear comes up again, and I stifle myself and I don't speak up. Okay, because that imprint is still active. I may need to go into work and speak up to my boss because I feel like I deserve a raise, or something's happening at work that I need to express. As soon as I go to knock on the boss's door, it happens again, and I don't. And so that's how trauma kind of lives within us. And so if we were able to then go in and work through, and we first understand and identify that, oh my God, it was that moment in grade 2 that I decided that I couldn't speak up. And so what I would take a client through is go back to that event, and we have various methods that we teach of processing the emotion around that, helping the client feel resourced within themselves, and they can essentially be the resource for themselves that they never had in that moment. And so let's say that takes 1, 2, 3 weeks or whatever. We'll know that that's then healed because they'll come back to me and go, oh my God, you won't believe it. Something happened at work the other day. I went into my boss, told him about it, expressed my needs and walk out. And then I was driving on the way home and I thought, oh shit, I would never have done that, 6 months ago. Like, that's so weird. And that's how we know. Now, when we're talking about sort of really deeper developmental trauma, stuff that's happening in those early years, when we're an infant up until when we're, 7 to 10 years old, oftentimes that can take a bit more of an unwinding. And so some clients, and that's why a lot of people want to say, well, how long is this going to take to resolve? And I'm like, I don't know. I hate seeing the marketing of like, we'll heal all your trauma in 3 sessions, or give us 5 weeks and it'll all be gone, because you're setting people up for an expectation that you cannot guarantee. And so there's some clients I've worked with for, 18 months, 2 years, and we're slowly rewiring their nervous system to feel a lot safer in their environment. But it's all worth it, because it doesn't matter if it takes 2 weeks, 2 years, or 10 years. If we're on the path of feeling more safe in our body and able to inhabit our body a lot more, then we're going to feel better and moving in the right direction.
Your modality is very much focused on the body. The idea is that you don't have the top to bottom approach, but the other way around?
Yeah. So we have one of the main modalities we teach. We call it somatic modalities. The soma is the body, and we called it embodied processing because, and this was my story for like most of my life. It's like we live life from the neck up, and we're just up here. We're overthinking, we're interpreting, we're cognizing life instead of actually being present and in our bodies for whatever experience is in front of us. Now, there's a very good reason why we do that is because as soon as we come down into our body, we start to feel all of that stuff that we've stored and held throughout a lifetime that we haven't been able to process. And, so as soon as I remember I heard about meditation like 15 years ago or something, and back then I had no awareness of sort of what was happening inside of me and what was to come. But I read like a lot of self-help books, and it's like, you got to meditate. And I was the person who I'd get home from work and just turn on a TV. I needed noise. I didn't realize that was a trauma response in many ways. And I'm like, all right, meditation, let's do this. I'm going to set up a little room out the back and turn everything off. And I'm going to sit there quietly. I'll just do like 5 or 10 minutes. And I remember sitting there for about 30 seconds and then quickly getting up and turning everything back on because it was absolutely torturous. I'm like, why would anybody do this? And the truth is that as soon as we drop back down in there, we have to feel. And a lot of us have suppressed and pushed away feeling for the majority of our lives because we didn't get a manual when we came into the world that told us how to be with our sensations, that all of our emotions, even the uncomfortable ones, are extremely important and give us valuable information. And so we often abandon ourselves in different emotional states. And this comes down to developmental stuff as well. It's like, whatever emotional state I was abandoned in growing up, I will abandon myself in as an adult. And so really obvious ones like anger. And so let's say when I was younger, whenever I got angry, I had a tantrum, I might get yelled at. In some instances, someone could get hit. Timeout's a big one. It's like go and be by yourself until you're not angry anymore. So we're literally being abandoned in the emotional state of anger. And so we develop a belief around that says, well, I'm not going to be accepted and loved if I'm angry. And so when we're an adult, and once again, we've moved out of home, where mum and dad aren't living with us anymore. We're meant to be an adult for ourselves. But whenever we start to get angry, we're like, I shouldn't be feeling this. I shouldn't be feeling this. So we just push it down and push it down. And, pretty much every client I've worked with, as well as the other emotions, but anger is the main one. They've got just so much stored and suppressed anger within their system. It's no wonder they're running into not just mental health issues, but a lot of people, start to get physical symptoms from just having so much pent up anger in their system that they don't know what to do with.
There is healthy anger and unhealthy anger. What's the difference?
So every emotion has a purpose. The purpose of anger is to let someone or something know that we have a boundary. And so this is where a lot of people who suppress anger end up becoming people pleasers, which means they have no boundaries. And so they're constantly doing things for other people. They have no self-respect and self-worth. They'll always abandon themselves to help someone else. And that person just ends up normally with a heap of resentment built up in the system because they didn't know how to properly set a boundary when they were younger. The other end of that spectrum is the people who are then just keeping everyone at arm's length, and they're always ready to be completely destructively angry, yell at other people, make everyone else wrong. And that's like two ends of a spectrum. It's the same kind of core issue, is that they have so much pent up anger and not what we call integrated anger, that they have a response that shows up as either ends of that spectrum. To come back to the middle, we have to work out how to actually hold anger within our system. Because what happens, we have something called overcoupling. So when we have an issue with anger, normally we'll allow ourselves to be angry up until a point that it is deemed unsafe. And so if we're using a scale of 0 to 10, maybe it's 4. And so we start to get angry, but as soon as we get to a 4, just based on being abandoned as a child, our nervous system steps in and shuts it down. It stifles it. Sort of just, no, not safe, get down there. So for a lot of clients, we have to have them in session experience their anger to more than a 4, to know that a 5 is safe. And that can take time. A 6, a 7, an 8 is safe. And then once they're able to feel anger, we're able to go back and start to process anger. And that might be at like, mum and dad for putting me in time out when I was a kid. All I wanted was to be seen, heard, and understood, and maybe held. And, but instead I was thrown in a room and the door was locked. So we have to go through then all of these experiences where anger was pushed down, let ourselves be angry at mum and dad without blaming as well. That's another little trap. We can't blame anyone else. And then over time, we'll feel more and more safer to experience anger within our body. And when we can hold, this is any emotional state, if we can hold an emotion without suppressing it, or projecting it, so throwing it on someone else, then we're in a very, very powerful state. We become a container for our emotions, and then emotions are able to come up, move through us, and then, we can process and move through them. And anger is just one of the most beautiful emotions, because the feeling of anger without any story or blame of anyone, and I can feel it now if I tap into it, it's our power. Like, that is our juice. So whenever I find someone, it's great. A lot of females that I work with who've got that people pleasing thing, they can start to integrate and work through it, and all of a sudden they can say no. They feel, and it's not no like yelling at people. It's just no. It's a no that just, you can feel it. It means something, and so we start to get our power back when we work with anger.
Those suppressed emotions, because people can go to the other end of the spectrum and say, oh, it's just emotions, I'm going to be very logical about it. And then I meet couples who are very happy about the fact that they never argue. And I always think, well, you're clearly not dealing with conflict here, and somebody's not expressing their needs and suppressing their emotions. What are the long-term consequences of that, of those suppressed emotions?
So I heard this quote a while ago. It's great. It says, we never successfully suppress anything, which means if we suppress an emotion for a moment, it's going to find an outlet somewhere. It just has to. It's just, and so what we find then is, and it's interesting because I was, a previous relationship I was in for a decade, and we basically never had a fight. And I always remember at the time going, yeah, it's just because it's a healthy relationship. And then obviously not, it fell apart, and it was because of all this, emotions on both parts. It's not healthy at all to not have disagreements, arguments, express emotions. And so what I find with people in relationship, when that happens, it finds an outlet somewhere else, whether one or both parties starts a behavior, whether it's drinking, gambling, flirting with other people, affairs. Like, it has to find an outlet somewhere. So yeah, I think it's incredibly unhealthy in relationship. And so one thing now I teach people, and I do practice in my own life myself, and I'm lucky enough because my partner Melissa, she's a therapist as well, and teaches this stuff as well. So it's a very, very safe format. But we will, as soon as something comes up, we'll express it straight away, and we'll nip it in the butt. And it'll be uncomfortable in the short term, but it just means that we're sort of open and free, from that point forward. So nothing festers.
I want to go back to your past and your addictions, because very often, first, addictions and using something and being addicted to something, two different things. But what I find with people, they very often in denial, and very often they have a very good story about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And if you remember yourself from that time when you were addicted to drugs, do you remember what were your stories, or how you rationalized that, and how that changed now with all your experience, and how you perceived addictions in general because of that?
It's a great question. Everyone's sort of, at a different place with addiction. There's quote unquote functional, drug addiction. I would see a lot of people who are, still holding down a job, relationship, and all that kind of thing. And I think deep down they know they have a problem with a behavior or a substance, but they don't want to admit it. And like you said, we become experts at telling a story that we believe, or bullshitting ourselves is what we call it down here in Australia. That's one thing I would tell clients, is like, we can move forward here, but the first step is we have to stop bullshitting ourselves. Like, you can't keep telling yourself this story and believing it. For me, I was sort of, towards the end especially, very much a dysfunctional drug addict, like an absolute mess. And my life was one of, my whole days consisted of buying, selling, and using drugs, and that was it, and trouble with the law and all that. So there's no rationalization that I could have used to say, yeah, this is what I want my life to be, because it wasn't. But I knew that I was running away from something, but I didn't know what, and I had no interest in looking at what that might be. I'm like, let me just keep focusing on the next thing. But, if we define addiction, because a lot of people will go, I don't know if I have an addiction or not. And I mean, we can use a definition of any behavior that I crave to do, find relief in once I do it, yet it having negative consequences in other areas of my life I'm unable to stop. I find that being a very helpful one. And an example of that might be, let's say that I am in Gambling. Let's say that I do a thing on Saturday with a few friends. We put in $20 each and we bet on some horses and we have a bit of fun on the group chat. And it's no problem. We're just having a bit of fun. But all of a sudden, I find myself after a while thinking about it a little bit more. And not just the one with them. I'm doing a few bets myself on a Saturday. Then all of a sudden, I'm starting to look into it during the week. Now I'm spending more and more money on it. And now all of a sudden, my son has a school camp coming up and I can't afford to send him to school camp because I've spent the savings on gambling. I now have tipped over that point where it's safe to say I have some sort of addiction. And so that can be gambling, it can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be codependent relationships, sex, food, shopping, work, a more socially acceptable addiction. But it's all us trying to cope with something inside. We're trying to run away from something. And that's normally just things that we don't want to feel inside. And so, yeah, one thing with addiction, we ran a few group classes last year of addiction. And the first thing we said, you have to be just radically honest with yourself. So we would have people tell us your story. Like, tell us your rationalization, your story about why you're doing this. And then we're going to sit here and just absolutely pull it apart. And so we would deconstruct their story and have them see the reality of the situation. And that was fun because then they would start to laugh when they told the story because they would realize halfway through that, oh my God, I'm absolutely talking rubbish to myself here.
It's sometimes all it takes, right? It's just to hear it. It's just to hear your voice and you just...
Because when we're doing it ourselves, or maybe we're repeating it to a partner or family or something, it's because we are unwilling to experience the guilt and shame. Every single person with addiction I've worked with is riddled with guilt and shame. Even the ones like I would have family members go, oh, my brother or my son's using, and they just don't care. There's no guilt and shame. They just literally don't care about anything. And I'm like, let me speak to them. Let me work with them. And oftentimes that is a mask, once again, masking this deep feeling of guilt and shame. It's like we know what we're doing is hurting ourselves and the people that we love. And so actually facing up to that is incredibly difficult, especially if we've never really faced up to our emotions for most of our life. It's kind of a mountain that's too big to climb. And that's why we need the education and need someone who understands and can guide us on that journey. And I know for me, I think lived experience practitioners in general are great, but in addiction, they're so needed. Because I remember going through the system with counselors and that kind of thing who had never been through addiction. They'd read it in a book. And so I'm just sitting there, arms crossed, just going, what would you know? Whereas as soon as I could be in the presence of someone who had been there as well, I'm sort of more willing to trust and open up in that context.
What does it take for a person to want to heal, to come to you and say, not to be sent to you, but to come to you and say, I do have a problem?
Futility. It's unfortunate. I've noticed a trend in maybe the last 5 or 6 years, which I'm absolutely loving, is I'm seeing more and more people coming in now, and this may be to do just with the general awareness that we have, but I see more people coming in. Let's say that, step 1 is like I'm starting to have a tiny bit of a problem. Step 10 is like the wheels have completely fallen off, like where I was. My life's a complete mess. There's no other option but to get help. I'm seeing a lot of people coming in at maybe step 3, 4, and 5, which is awesome. It's definitely not the majority of people, but more people are coming in going, I've started to engage in this behavior, or I'm starting to feel this anxiety or depression, and it's not like a huge issue yet, but I know that if I don't address it now, it's only going to get worse. And that's awesome. Like, I love that. And I'm hoping that becomes more of a trend. But more often than not, it is futility, where people have bumped their head up against the wall so many times that they realize I just have to do something different. For me, I was in the position where I was just going to end up in jail or dead. And so I'm like, oh, well, I might as well try and look at this. And for a lot of people, it's a similar situation. It's futility. My friend Matt, who I run a lot of our trainings with, he went to rehab 17 times. And so it's like, and I was after that 17th time, and he just lost a close friend while he was in that rehab. It was the last friend he had in the world. And that's what sort of broke him open to go, okay, I need to not just, because there's one thing of going to rehab or going to a therapist. There's another one where you're like, I'm going to lay myself bare and give everything because I have no other option. And so, yeah, it's futility, but I'm seeing a trend lately that I'm encouraged by. And because a great analogy is physical health, right? We know that if we want to get in shape, we need to eat better and start going to the gym, or do some form of exercise. But we know that, I can't go to the gym twice and then expect to be fit, or I can't get myself in shape and then go, all right, I'm in shape, and then just stop working out and eating crap and expect to continue to be in shape. But we do that with our mental health. You know, we leave the weeds in the garden to grow, and we don't want to look at them. And so I think you spoke about in your last question about, you know, is healing possible? And you said, does it take a lifetime? It doesn't take a lifetime, but what we always talk about is we encourage people to make this a lifestyle. Our mental and emotional health needs to be part of our lifestyle and who we are as a human being. And also being honest with ourselves needs to be part of that routine as well. So it kind of is, I guess, a lifetime journey if you look at it in that context. But, you know, it's looking after ourselves at the end of the day.
I think it's also a question of when you connect it to physical health. Eating healthy, now it's called a diet because of all the crap around the diet. And it's the same with mental health, you know. Now it's being obsessed about mental health when actually it's because of how the world is. You need to actually make it healthy.
Yes, I agree.
I read it somewhere the other day that it's not us because we really like to feel that we in control. We have everything, you know, sorted, and it's rational thinking that is in charge. And that it's actually not us who decides about our fate, but it's our nervous system that decides about our fate. How does our nervous system trick us? In what areas?
It's our nervous system, also the sort of emotional body at large. But we love to think that we're these rational, logical creatures, and we kind of are to a degree. But here's the thing: I've witnessed this over all the time I've been doing this. When you have your logical or rational mind saying one thing and pulling you in one direction, but your emotional body and your nervous system is pointing you in the other direction, the emotional body and the nervous system will always win, if not straight away, eventually. It's just so much stronger. We are emotional creatures. We are driven by emotion. It's that inclination to move towards something or away from something, and it just drives our behavior constantly. You know, so, you know, there's no way to, I think, we can reframe small issues and maybe look at them at a different way. But when we have a big issue with our nervous system, because our nervous system, what its function is to detect if there's any threat in our environment. So it's detecting, is there threat or is there the absence of threat? And if there is threat, a perceived threat, it wants to then go into some sort of mode to then deal with that threat. And so, you know, you might have heard the term like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. What will happen is if there's a perceived threat in our environment, then our nervous system will go, okay, I need to mobilize and fight back or run away, you know, or it might go, I need to shut down and suppress to go into like a dissociated state. And it will do that very much out of our conscious awareness. There's no way that our conscious mind can go, nah, don't like the fight state. Can you please go into a shutdown state? You can't do it. You know, it's just, it's so hard. I mean, it's based on our experiences and the imprints as a human. One thing that we teach a lot in our programs as well is you can watch the nervous systems of animals and the way that they act in their environment, and they're constantly working with their nervous system, not against it. You know, and there's a classic video of an impala getting catched by a lion, and the lion literally has it, you know, in its jaws, and the impala, you can see its nervous system go into a complete shutdown state to the point where it looks dead. You know, its nervous system has slowed its heart rate completely made its muscles all floppy and everything. And the lion's carrying this impala back to its wherever it's going to eat it, I guess. And then on the way, the lion gets distracted, like another animal or something's off in the distance, and it drops the impala and it walks off to inspect this other thing. And you can see while the lion's gone, the impala's nervous system wakes back up out of a shutdown state. It starts shaking and it takes these huge breaths. So it's coming now into what we call a sympathetic or mobilized state, and it wakes up and then it runs off and it escapes. You know, so we can watch, and animals move very naturally with their nervous system and their environment, whereas human beings, we get stuck actually by trying to rationalize and cognize and saying, I shouldn't be feeling this or I shouldn't be experiencing this. You know, I always tell clients whenever they say should or shouldn't, I'm like, don't swear at me. They can say all the actual swear words they want in a session, but just don't say should or shouldn't, because it implies that we should be having a different experience than the one we're having right now. So I would say to people, you know, if you do like talking about your problems and rationalizing and thinking logically, that's fine. But I would also experience the other side as well. Because I'm by nature, you know, I'm very analytical. That's just my brain is very much wired that way. We all have a different nature and a different disposition. And I'm always, the one word that always comes to mind in this field is balance. Like, how do we become a more balanced human being? So I know if it's very easy for me to be logical and rational, I need to be constantly working at the emotional side of things, and also my creativity and all that, because I want to become more balanced. Because anytime the pendulum goes too far one way, we tend to run into some issues there. So I'm always trying to balance out. So, like, for me, if we're talking about the nervous system, I'm more sympathetic dominant, which is higher energy, mobilization, doing things. So for me, and in in the East, they would say you're more yang. So the yin yang, that's more yang energy. So for me, I've got to do a lot of yin practices just to try and balance me out a little bit. So Matt, who I do so much trainings with, and we're great friends and all that, and we get along great. We're so different as well. He is much more parasympathetic, and he relaxed. Likes to keep to himself, and all of that. So for him, he has to practice more yang stuff because it doesn't come naturally to him. Yeah, because if we just stay in our own little lane and just stay there, then we tend to run into some issues. Like I said, we get out of balance as a human.
But that's exactly this as well. When you describe your nervous system going to the shutdown, sometimes what people think, oh, I need to practice meditation, but actually meditation is going to do much worse, the shutdown much worse, because this is not what you need right now. You need to actually to activate it, not deactivate it.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people who are the other side might meditate and go, "Oh no, this is silly because it's too hard." But it's like, it's the reason, because it's hard is the reason why you should stick with it and start to become familiar with it. So it's sort of, life will show us where we're meant to go, and oftentimes the more resistance that we push up against is actually what we need to do. But in terms of the logical brain as well, the example I used earlier. So let's say I have that imprint of grade 2 putting my hand up. And then I go to, speak to my partner, and I go to step into the room. I've played the conversation over in my head 30 times about expressing my needs. And my logical brain's just having a feast on exactly how it's going to go. But then as soon as I walk in, that nervous system kicks up with all of its fear, threat, rejection, embarrassment. Yeah. And then it pulls me back. And it doesn't matter how much you rationalize that, it's going to keep pulling you back time and time again, because it's too strong. Because at the end of the day, our survival mechanism, which is what our nervous system is looking at, our survival mechanism is so strong. That's why we can't, I can't hold my head underwater until I drown. Like, it's literally not possible. I will come up every time, because the survival instinct of the human being is just incredibly powerful. And so anytime that our nervous system kicks into gear like that, and even if it is social rejection or psychological rejection or something like that, it acts the exact same way as if we're physically under threat.
How does it present itself? How does it trick us in terms of self-sabotage? Because I would never ever make that connection in the past. I would always think, if you want to succeed at something, clearly you just need to set yourself some goals, and then you just go and achieve them.
Sounds so easy.
Yeah, our nervous system can trick you, and that's a discovery for this year for me personally. That nervous system can still pull you somehow.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, so I'll use an example with our practitioners, because we'll train up practitioners in our methods. They love it. They're like, oh my God, I can't wait to take this out into the world. And then maybe they're running a sole practice. And so they have to go to the process of, I need to find clients now. And so I've done some mentoring with people, and time again, they're like, I know I need to put myself out there. I need to, share stuff on social media, like start a podcast or a YouTube channel. I know that I need to start writing, whatever it is, but I keep going to do it and I can't get myself to do it. So they've written that they've got their list of goals there, like you're talking about, but they get to like number 3 and they can't get past it. And then what they do then, most people do, is they start beating themselves up, and they start going, oh, I'm so worthless. Why do I procrastinate on this? And, we compound the problem. But every time we dive in and do the work that we teach, the modalities and everything, there's oftentimes a real fear of being seen. So there's a nervous system and an emotional imprint of, it's not safe to be seen. And that's normally because at some point in our life, we were seen and we were judged and criticized, most likely by the people that we loved the most. And so we decided that it's not safe. If the nervous system, when it goes into a fear response, if it could talk, if it had language, it would just say, not safe, not safe. And so in that instance, I've got my goal number 3 on my list of goals to achieve what I want, or steps. And I go to do that, and the nervous system says, not safe, not safe. And so now there's a pull. They're both pulling in opposite directions. And like I spoke about earlier, nervous system's going to win because it's a survival response. Not our conscious desires of I want to help people, I want to make money doing what I love. That will get sabotaged because it's deemed to not be safe. So we always teach people and a lot of our practitioners that whenever that happens in any area of our life, we get curious. We go, oh, what's that? And we start to ask some deep questions and explore what that might be instead of the I'm useless, I'm worthless, oh my God, why can't I do this? Because I mean, that's just once again where we're beating ourselves over the head and we don't deserve that. So we remain curious. And then oftentimes we can get great insights when we're curious about our experience. And then also we just can then maybe reach out to a practitioner and just go, hey, I've got this coming up for me in terms of putting myself out there. Can we explore this deep fear of being seen by the world? And it's like, money, you talk about money a lot on your YouTube channel, and people can have so many hang-ups and imprints around money. I know that I've had to work on that an absolute heap. And that's where, once again, it might be safe to earn this much, but it's not safe to earn more. And that could be because no one else in the family has ever made more than that. And so, or maybe once I make more than that, then people are going to want it. People are going to come and take it off me. All of that is survival, like not safe, not safe. Either not safe as in the family's going to reject me, or not safe because people are going to come and take it. And so once again, we have to just go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Let's dive in and explore that, because otherwise we're just going to keep, if we try and use the blunt force of rationality and logic and go, no, I just need to complete the step and get to the next one, we're going to end up not doing it and then having a lower opinion of ourselves than when we started.
And probably will end up with lots of productivity tips, watching videos about productivity and having different tools. And again, going back to the head, but actually not to the root of the problem.
Exactly.
If people cannot afford therapy, and I know that your courses, and you do release lots of free courses as well, are super helpful. But what would you say to somebody today, what they can do for their nervous system today and for their, emotional well-being?
Work out who you feel safe around. If you pay attention to your nervous system, it will give you cues and tell you. Once again, we're not working against it. All we're doing is we're kind of being aware of what's happening. It's like, well, when I'm around that person or in this situation, I can feel that gnaw or anxiety at me. But when I'm around this person, I feel completely relaxed. I feel like I can sink into my seat. I don't have to filter myself. I feel like a mask that I've been wearing is taken off. Spend more time with those people. I would join groups as well. It's a really cheap option. Work out if there's groups in your area. A lot of men, like there's a lot of great men's groups now. But anything where you can get around people who you can feel safe around. It's just so important for your nervous system. I said at the start, we start to heal relationally. And oftentimes people as well, when we're having issues with our mental health and nervous system, we have to make a change up in our environment. Okay, because we get stuck just doing the same things, having the same experiences, and sort of nothing really gets better. So just by joining that group or going to a class that's really cheap or going to a talk, all of a sudden we can have a different experience. And who knows, you might go back to that group, you might meet someone at that group that you really vibe with, and all of this, I think, moves us in the right direction.
How do you know the difference between your nervous system knowing this is safe for you and trauma bonding?
Yeah. So this is where the education is why we have, like you spoke about a money thing, but we have like free courses. So we have, free courses for like, $50, something like that, where you can start to educate and learn this stuff. And that's what you're talking about is discernment. Discernment only comes through daily practice. Yeah. So it's like waking up in the morning and going, okay, what I'm going to experience today is a bunch of thoughts in my head. I'm going to have some emotions and feelings in my body, and I'm going to experience what comes in through my senses. Let me be aware of those three things as I move through my day, of what's happening outside and what's happening inside. And over time, you start to get really, really good at understanding yourself. And so it's only at that point that you can meet someone at a group and be like, yeah, this is awesome. Let's exchange numbers. Let's catch up. And then go, oh, hang on. that feels like, the experience with this person when I was a kid. And that feels like I feel like this person will save me, and desperately I want someone to save me, but at the end of the day, I can only save myself. This only comes through, making this a lifestyle, because I can't give you an exact dot point of what might be a trauma bond and what mightn't. The person will only know if they're really acutely aware of what's happening inside, because they'll know their individual cues, and it will stop them, once again, with that theme of not bullshitting themselves and going, no, it's not a trauma bond, let's just go for it. It's like, no, I know what's going on here, and that's gonna recreate a pattern. It started when I was 8 and has echoed through my relationships in the past. I need to do something different in this instance. But it's got to be a lifestyle to do that.
I was going to say it's going to be a lot of homework from your therapy sessions.
Yes, yeah. I don't like the word homework. It's got to be,
Life work.
Yeah, life work. Can we use that? That's better.
Where can people find more about you, about your work? Where should we send them to?
Just the Center for Healing is the name of my business, and the centerforhealing.com is our website. We're the Center for Healing on Facebook, Instagram. I think we're on TikTok. I'm a bit old. I haven't got the TikTok app, but I'm pretty sure we have a TikTok account. Down here in Australia, we spell Center TRE. So that's how you spell it, but just the Center for Healing. Embodied processing is that somatic modality I was talking about. Just Google that. It'll come right up. And reach out if you have any questions or want to engage in any way.
And recently you also launched the podcast.
Yes. Yeah, last week. We've been, the team's been at me to start a podcast for probably about 2.5 years now. So I finally have said yes. So we're very excited. We just released 4 episodes straight off the bat last week. It's just called the Center for Healing podcast, and we're going to release one each week. And that's going to be either subject matter experts where we're doing a talk on a topic, or we're going to have a interview, of some description. So we're going to be mixing it up a little bit. There's also myself, Matt, Melissa, with different people hosting. So there should be a good variety for people to tune into.
I can totally recommend it already. It's been great, Ryan. Thank you very much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I am a huge fan of what you're doing, and I'm wishing you the best of luck.
I enjoyed it as well, Marta. Thank you.